I never thought I'd win a championship, but we shocked the world with the Philadelphia Wings, and we went up into Toronto with 19,000 fans. We were heavy underdogs and beat them 9-7. Because when I first got drafted into that league, I was clueless. I had never played box lacrosse in a hockey rink. I still, to this day, I can't understand why coaches are drawing things during games. And I don't know if it's just a gimmick or not. In order to maximize who you're going to be as a lacrosse player, or this would hold true to any sport, you need to be really hungry, because just like any sport, a champion is made in his yard. It's not even with a trainer, right? It's not with private lessons. It's just doing the shit on your own. And that's where the great ones are made.
Let's just flow into the conversation, man. I love that you bring in your travels here over the last, week. I wanted to bring in a conversation here piece that just around your sons and how the spring's going and how they're looking. I know you just said you came from a scrimmage for UVA, and I'd love to hear how that went. No tidbits that Lars would be upset at, but how'd that go, man?
Yeah, so first one was great. We scrimmaged at Navy, and I'm up here in Baltimore, so that was a little bit of just a quick little 40-minute ride down the road. And then last weekend, they were in Charlottesville scrimmaging Drexel and I forget who else, but Washington and Lee. But the team looks good. It's hard to tell this early. Everyone's on different kind of platforms right now. Drexel had really just gotten going. So we opened this weekend at home against Colgate. They're really good. But the team's off to a good start, obviously missing some, superstar guys. So it's going to be a lot different team, but a lot of anticipation and excitement for the spring, and it gets going full bore this weekend.
I want to read a quote that I pulled in here from UVA's website. This is Lars talking about McCabe. He said, "McCabe never stops running and running fast. With our wearable GPS tracking devices, the man with the highest volume and player load at the end of most practices is McCabe." And I want to bring that in because I feel like in today's lacrosse world, or maybe just sports in general, there's so much specialization and this idea that like we have to be rested. And then I see that quote that's basically like McCabe doesn't stop running all the time and all of this stuff. How do you kind of mix that when you're looking at player development for your son, but also just in general as a player?
Yeah, so like when I'm trying to develop a young attackman, the first thing you got to do is look at, their athleticism and what kind of player they're going to be. And once I see kind of the type of athlete they're going to be, try to get moving with like developing a player who, can do it all. One of the things I kind of prided myself on was just being able to do all different kinds of stuff. Casey Powell, Mike Powell, and, they can play with both hands. They can dodge. They can shoot off the dodge. They can pass off the dodge. They can ride their butt off. So McCabe's that kind of player who can kind of do it all and play all over the field. So he has a high motor, and he came home over Thanksgiving, and he's like, "Man, I got to get in sick shape because I just want to be all over the place this year, and all the way through Memorial Day, hopefully." So he's like, that's gonna take a lot of energy. So that's who he is, and he's been working hard to have a put himself in position to have a good year.
Real quick, why did UVA fall short in your estimation last year?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think ultimately, it's impossible to do this, right? But like, I am a big fan of NBA, MLB, NHL series. You can't do this in college lacrosse. It's never been done. But like any given game, you can just kind of put up a stinker, right? And they had been kind of up and down all year, and they did not play their best game. And Maryland had a great game plan and kind of took them off the things that they wanted to do. But ultimately, I don't want to sit here and say, oh, if we played Maryland 3 times. Yeah. But like, I just don't think we played our best game in that one. It was a heck of a team. It was fun to watch, but just fell a little short.
Yeah, I just took a look at the final score there. Yeah, 12-6. So I like the potential of a series in some form or fashion, but yeah, we'll see if it ever gets implemented.
Well, it won't even get implemented, and I'm not even like pushing for the implementation of that. I'm just saying anytime. like Hopkins, right? We beat them the week before in the quarters. They could have probably said the same thing, that if we played Virginia 3 or 4 times, they had us by 2 goals late in that game. And that's the dynamic of college lacrosse, and that's what makes it so exciting. It is just that one game, but didn't have our best that day.
Mark, I was looking at a ton of your highlights here before we got into the show, and I want to have this conversation around being a two-handed player, because it feels like the game went from maybe having a lot of one-handed players to this idea that, hey, and you were kind of a trailblazer in this, that you wanted to be a two-handed player, but now it almost feels like the game is then now returning to that kind of Canadian feel of one-handed players. You can stay on one side of the field even in the field game. So I'm just interested in your thought here on like how being a two-handed player works in the modern game.
Yeah, it's an awesome question, and it's really, to me, it's a simple answer. Right now, like, arguably, I don't want to leave anybody out, but like you have, I think, some of the best attackmen in the game. I'll just name two of them, and that's Connor Schellenberger and Mike Sowers. And those guys are incredibly two-handed. And then you take, what most people would say the best player in the game is Jeff Teat, and he's incredibly one-handed. And to me, it ultimately comes down to where you're born and raised, and then also your body type. So I think the only way to be extremely one-handed like Jeff Teat or, Gary Gate and John Grant and stuff like that is to have your stick in your hands playing box pretty much the whole year. You learn so many different tactics of getting your stick back to the middle and just the ability to make plays in all different capacities using that. And that's because they play on one side of the floor. Now, if you're an American player and you're basically playing 90%, even if someone's playing a little bit of box, which my boys did, I don't know if Shelly and Michael did, but yeah, I think they did. You're not in there enough to refine the skills of playing with one hand. So if you're a young American player and you're fairly athletic, I did say, like, there are American players I could say that should probably focus on one hand. And that's the like bigger, less athletic guy's going to be an off-ball guy. And they can just focus on playing around the goal and just be so crafty. Like a Zach Greer comes to mind from back in the day at Duke. Not that he wasn't athletic or anything, but although he was a Canadian, I think. I mean, that's my whole take. If you're growing up in the United States and you're not playing box and you're not playing on the right side of the floor all day long, you should probably focus on the two-handedness. Grant Ament's another guy that plays with both hands. So generally, I still feel like it gives you a massive advantage at the attack position to be able to do that against the long pole.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. First of all, maybe it's because I'm an American and there is that inherent bias, but it's harder to scout. For me, when I go up against a guy who has two hands and I'm trying to scout for my team and figuring out where we send guys, it's just harder. But I get that there's those 5 to 10% of guys that can really give you a hard time no matter what hand they're working with. What are those tendencies? Like if I want to zoom in, like what is Jeff Teat and what are these Canadians learning in just like the osmosis of doing it a ton? Are there any specific things you can point out that make them great with just one hand?
It's just the fact that they fight so hard to get their stick back to the middle, and all of their body mechanics are set up to like be square to the other side of the floor where they have to throw the ball to, and then just constantly just using fake shots and top, hitch moves. And it's just the craftiness of being able to like turn and spin because you're in a small area and because you're basically keeping it in that hand the whole time. It gives you an advantage in box. But then when it comes to field, like basically they would say you don't really need both hands. And again, like if you're trying to raise an American player, if I'm living in Connecticut and I'm like, I want my son to be Jeff Teat, like good luck doing it if you're not playing box 200 times a year. Mm-hmm. Like I'm sure when Jeff was growing up, he wasn't going to, the random summer tournaments. And like he was in the hockey rink playing the box rink, playing lacrosse, learning how to get that stick back to the middle. So I don't know if that is specific enough, but
Yeah.
that's kind of what I think.
We were talking earlier about McCabe's work rate, and then you're saying T is playing 200 times a year. What, if any, thought process do you have around rest at all for these guys that are like pre-college or in college? Like how do you look at that when basically what you're telling me is like, hey, you just need to be playing a bunch, you know?
Yeah, you need to be playing a bunch. But what's really interesting, I just had this conversation offline with somebody today. Like, I have a very specific model for like the young lacrosse athlete who's 12, 14, and wants to be great. And it's really simple. It's play a lot of lacrosse, play a lot of other sports. And my thing that I think, you know, confuses people is playing other sports doesn't mean you have to be like all in on the other sports. Like, you don't have to be playing AAU basketball and playing basketball. If you're playing basketball with your buddies in a pickup thing, you're playing basketball. If you're playing soccer, if you're playing baseball and it's like literally wiffle ball in your yard, the eye-hand coordination and some of the skills that come with it, you don't need to be playing travel baseball. So play a lot of lacrosse, play a lot of other sports. And then here's the kicker. Don't play too much lacrosse. And the reason is you need to stay hungry in order to maximize who you're going to be as a lacrosse player, or this would hold true to any sport. You need to be really hungry because just like any sport, a champion is made in his yard. Goofing around, playing, going out and shooting, working off his rebounder, simulate, going through all the fundamental dodges, right? And if you play lacrosse too many days a year, I don't care who you are, you're probably not going to go out and work at it enough. And I think what parents feel is like, just keep playing, 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 playing. And then the kid's like, I'm not going outside shooting on my goal. And then you lose the part that makes you the best.
I wanted to leave this till later in the conversation, but it sounds like we're running up against like the club conversation as it exists today in that atmosphere. What's your take on this whole idea of player development through that process, right? Camps, clubs, all of this stuff. It sounds like you have a model here for potential, parents and guys of a certain age to go about it the right way, because we certainly know there's a wrong way, right? Parents chasing the wrong things, getting their kids invested their time in the wrong things. So what's your thought on that?
Yeah, I think the model is strong enough, and I think it's set up, with integrity. Where the model falls short of what I was just saying is, again, the club should provide incredible fundamentals and player development and should encourage kids to get out and practice on their own. And then they should play what is like an adequate amount of lacrosse. And I could even tell you what I think that is, but I don't know if it really matters. What's the problem in today's world is parents are generally just feeling their own internal anxiety and pressure, and they're encouraging their kids to play just too much. So they're not playing just in their club, they're then playing in their club's national team. And then that's not enough. So then they got to play on outside national teams. And then exactly what happens, like I was saying before, is the kid is playing so much that he's losing his passion for the game, and he's losing his drive for the single most important part, and that is working in the backyard on your own. And so the model is to learn every move. You could learn it from me in a private lesson, or you could learn it on YouTube. It doesn't matter. Learn the fundamental and practice that fundamental thousands of times. I think enough people don't talk about like the Malcolm Gladwell thing of 10,000 hours. And that's 10,000 hours. Let's say it's a little too much, right? It's an exaggeration for effect. But it takes a lot of hours to perfect a game. And if all you're doing is playing, it's not adequate. It's not the right way to do it. And I did that with my boys. We played a lot of lacrosse, but we kept it reasonable and in check so that they didn't lose their drive and passion for it.
When you're teaching techniques to, let's say a guy is doing it the right way and he's got a mind for the game, are you teaching the technique and then having them in a game-like scenario, or are you throwing them into the game scenario and then trying to teach it within that environment?
So generally teaching the technique in like a practice, on-field scenario, get the move perfect. and then encouraging them to reinforce it. Like McCabe and Brendan, we have these things we just call fiddle sessions. And that's like, I generally tell young kids to work when they're practicing lacrosse, because the helmet and gloves are so unique in lacrosse, to practice with their helmet and gloves. But once in a while, I've always told those guys to just go out and just mess around and do the dodges and stuff. And what you're doing there is you're trying to reinforce in your mind, like, when to do those in games. Because what's really interesting is, just because you can do an underneath dodge, which is just a dodge, it's like, I got it from Gary Gate back in the day. It's just when you wind up for Brennan O'Neill does it. You know, you're winding up for a shot, you pull the stick across, you go under. You can do that dodge perfect, but when to pull it out in the right moment in a game happens through reinforcing that on your own in practice, but also in your own practice. So I couldn't be like a golfer, a basketball player. Like those people are, the great ones were made in their backyard. I always say in their backyard. It's not even with a trainer, right? It's not with private lessons. It's just doing the shit on your own. And that's where the great ones are made.
I always pull out this when we have kind of the technique and the understanding, getting those hours in. But the video of the Thompson brothers just kind of playing, in the backyard on those highlight videos where they were just literally playing with themselves. Maybe there was even a defender that wasn't there and they were pretending that there was a defender there. I'm with you 100%.
No doubt. No doubt. And if you add in that, like a lot of Casey, I'm pretty good buddies with Casey Powell, and he's got this like speed lacrosse, and it's just a version of just like going out and messing around 3-on-3 when you're 12, and that is really important. Now, if you have some skill set there too, if you have good technique when you shoot, and you can couple the fiddling and messing around with good technique, then now you really have a chance.
I love that. I want to get into your growth as a player, right? And using some of these techniques growing up and kind of seeing where you got those from all the way up to being a pro. Slight disclaimer, and I don't take this the wrong way at all, but like, you're a little bit before my time. Like I didn't watch that much growing up, as like a, 8 to 10 year old, but I got into the game when I was in high school and all of that stuff. And, kind of seeing your growth, obviously you're one of the better MLL players of all time. And I just want to get to the 2024 or 25 season first and your thoughts, and then let's get into what you got. So any other thoughts on the 2025 season? I know we touched on UVA, but what are your thoughts here as we kind of roll into the second week of the season?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at it on paper for the 25 season, I mean, two of those ACC schools are going to be pretty hard to beat. Notre Dame, they got such a great mojo going and confidence and experience from playing in those last two national titles and winning them, along with a ton of talent. So you look at those guys on paper, and then Syracuse is, I don't know how they're going to, they have everything they need from the face-off to the goalie. They're offensive guys. They have probably too many guys, all talented, all smart. And then arguably their best, attribute as a team is their defense. I just can't believe the guys they have down there. So they're going to be really, really tough. And then outside of that, I haven't studied enough. I just know those two teams are just incredible. And then, the Dukes and Marylands will be there. And then one of the Ivies will come, sprinting through. Penn's defense is unreal. Everyone's talking about Cornell, and Yale has talent. It's going to be an interesting season. I definitely think those two are going to separate, and that's Notre Dame and Syracuse.
Are you buying the hype with I guess you are. You said they were the second best team, but after that shellacking, I mean, usually Jacksonville's competitive, even in those games. I think they've probably given Q's a scare once or twice in that environment, and then they get beat 24-3. Like that was just watching that was a little wild.
So I've played in the Dome as a college athlete twice, and it is an intimidating place to play. So I think you have to factor in, we don't know much about Jacksonville yet, and it is a very tough place to play. It can be intimidating. And then I think Syracuse is that good. I think they just have so many, their offensive guys are really smart players. So they're not only good athletes but they're all crafty and smart. So I think they're going to be unreal. And this Virginia team, I think they have a really good chance. I think they're really good from what I've seen so far. They have a really good vibe and mojo and some key spots covered with some good players. And so it's going to be an interesting and fun year, I feel.
How's your UMass team going to be doing?
I think they're a little bit young. Coach Canella and I are good buddies, and I love the program to death. And it was a great decision I made in going there. And I just don't know enough about them. I think they'll contend.
Yeah.
One of the things that people don't know about UMass is that Greg Canella is arguably the best coach in the country with what he has. The facilities aren't quite what like Big Ten ACCs have, and he just does a great job, and he gets those guys competitive every year in their conference. So they'll be good.
Yeah, I love that answer. Also, a big shout out to everybody that can keep up on the entirety of the scene. I mean, I've seen some guys that are like Division 2, 3 and 1, and they've got it all covered. I don't know how they do it. So
yeah, I mean it's their passion. I'm sure. I'm worried a lot about my boys and running my business and stuff. So I'm on it. I watch a lot of the stuff. We have a great game in town tonight with Hopkins and Towson. I'm watching the stuff. I just can't spout out
the points per game on each of these teams. Yeah, I understand.
Exactly.
Yeah, let's get into this, man. Again, I added that disclaimer a little bit before my time, so I'd love to hear about your kind of time upcoming to the MLL and the NLL. Like I haven't been a huge watcher of the indoor game in my time. I get to see games and I watch them, but just as far as that league and the history of it, I just love to hear from someone who's played in both, and it's an honor to even talk to you when it comes to like what your experience is in this game. So I'm just excited to have that combo. But
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it. I'll hit it in like 2 minutes. I grew up on Long Island. I went to a small school called Harborfields. Ended up having a lot of options for college. Maryland and Cuse were probably my 2 and 3. And just something about UMass was just struck me. The coach there, Dick Garber, was a legend. He was kind of a father figure. So I went up there, had a great career. Just didn't push into where I thought we would when I speculated going there. I wanted to play in a Final Four. We never got there. After graduation, played on two U.S. teams, and was the experience of a lifetime. I used to have the poster in my room, and that was kind of it. I was 9 in the 1980 U.S. Olympic team. So I saw and heard those USA chants and saw what they did and just wanted to play on the USA lacrosse team. So it was a absolute honor and privilege to do that and win 2 championships, and then did 9 years in the NLL, played for a bunch of teams, highlighted by, I never thought I'd win a championship, but we shocked the world with the Philadelphia Wings, and we went up into Toronto with 19,000 fans. We were heavy underdogs and beat them 9-7. And then a bunch of years in the MLL, helped to kind of pioneer it and get it off the ground, and won a championship there. So
yeah. Can I break down one of those pieces? If searching for your highlights and kind of looking at your playing career, the one that comes up the most is that USA Canada game. So I'd love for you to take me through that dodge where you kind of had him from the low, kind of left lower corner, and you kind of beat him topside and stung it. Was that for the win as well?
So it would have been, because that was overtime. International lacrosse weirdly plays like 2-3 minute overtime periods. So it was the first goal in overtime. We ended up scoring one more, and they scored one. But that was an incredible game. The games were in Baltimore for the first time in a long time. And Hopkins was packed. At that time, they had stands in the end zones. There was probably like 12, 13,000 people there. One of the first, lacrosse had been on TV many times in the NCAA Final Four, but one of the first international events, everyone was watching it. It took the country by storm. And we had a really good team. Canada had a really good team. Both Gates, Maricek, John Grant, John Tavares, Jim Veltman. We got off to like an 11-2 lead. And believe it or not, there was so much pressure on us playing at home. And the U.S. team had not lost. This was 1998. We had not lost since 1979, I think.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I think that was it. 1970. No, it was even before that. But anyway, we got that lead, And I think we all just took a deep breath and said, we got it. And I just chipped away and chipped away. And 11-2 became overtime. And they actually had a great shot to tie it in regulation. Sal Lacasio made a great save. But yeah, that goal, I just didn't want to lose. Bill Tierney tells some funny stories about like the end of that game and me. But I just didn't want to lose and just took the ball in the corner and waved a couple people off and went and stuck it.
Did you set him up at all, or like what was your thought process as you were like setting up that dodge?
I used to love to go to that corner where like, it's a pretty tough spot for the defender because if I had speed, so if I went to my right going full speed, I would have a really good, I could either get under him from the corner or I could just get past him and then start running towards the crease and have a great passing opportunity. But I chose to kind of split it off and go top side. And it was, decent length out. I had practiced that summer. I lived literally like 2 miles from Hopkins. So I would just go up and hop the fence and go shoot there like the whole spring leading up to that. So I must have taken that shot 1,000 times on that field. Not only that shot, on that field. So it was pretty cool.
How did your game transition to the box atmosphere, right? You just mentioned speed was one of your big things, but in that box game, when you're in tight, that speed can get you in trouble sometimes. So how are you dealing with that transition as a player in that moment?
With a lot of work, because when I first got drafted into that league, I was clueless. I had never played box lacrosse in a hockey rink. And I was like running, in box, the whole thing is you're playing on a side and you're keeping the stick to the inside for your shots and playing a lot of 2-man. And I had no idea. So I was like making a split and going over the top and like a sweep. But
the coach was like,
but all of us were doing that. It was the team. If I got drafted by a Canadian team, it would have been awesome for development. But we're all doing it. And then I started talking to, I got to know Gary and Paul. I actually worked at STX at the time, right out of college, and those guys are STX athletes. So I talked to them and got a lot of guidance and started to really understand and adapt my game. But it wasn't pretty in the beginning. It took a while.
How long did it? I mean, I kind of want to have this NLL discussion, man, because again, it's not foreign to most American players, but it is. Like, it's not like they haven't ever seen it before. But if they tried to strap up just like you, they'd have a tougher time. So yeah, to take me through that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, in today's world, like my two boys, I run a box program here in Baltimore, and I know like the guys on Long Island are playing. Like Brendan O'Neill probably played, I don't know, 100 box games. I'm just going to guess in his high school, middle school and high school. And that's why he looks so comfortable and he's so good. I had never played lacrosse in a hockey rink with a big goalie. So most kids today have had at least some experience with it. So it's a little different in today's world. But back then in 1993, 94, it definitely took a lot. I mean, the goalies were so big and the goals were so small, and I didn't understand that you had to move them. And I remember being with Gary in Baltimore, and he was just showing me some kind of techniques for faking and stuff like that. I mean, in box, generally, you got to try to move the goalie to get so you can see some net. And that was boring to me.
Are there any field techniques that transfer well to the box game? Like, I know it obviously goes the other way. A lot of box guys like are talking about how much it helps in the field game, but is there anything you brought over from field that made you a better box player?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know if there's anything specific to field lacrosse, but like all of the skills, once you start to, I can use a change of direction into a 2-man game. So I can run up the left and then quickly roll back and have a pick set. So like your skill set, the skill set you've learned for the field game carries over awesome, but there's no specific thing that like, oh, if you play field lacrosse, this is really going to help you. But just the skills, right? The dodging and the stick work. And obviously the versatility helps. I think sometimes with the wings, just because I worked so hard to play with 2 hands, I would play on the right side of the floor and the left side, not at the same time, but having that versatility can also help.
Is there anything other than just making sure you rep out the same kind of action here on the other side of your body that you can talk about with the two hands? Because a lot of people preach that, but I feel like we definitely see like not a lot of people do it as well as you. I'll just say that. You see a lot of, even at the college level, yeah, they have an offhand, but it's not equal in kind of that experience or that talent and technique on the other side.
Well, one really cool fact, I don't think I get enough credit for it, and it doesn't matter because being credited for being able to play with both hands better than most, who cares? But one cool fact is everything I do righty, play golf righty, I write righty, I hit righty. I was a right-handed lacrosse player. In high school, they needed a lefty. My brother and a big dude named Matt Case were the righties, and no one was moving them. And so they said, you got to be a lefty. I literally devoted everything I had. And then it translated so well. I got so good at it that I was like, I'm just going to kind of be a lefty attackman. So if you watch, like a lot of my highlights, I played a lot of, like with the USA team, I think our starting attack was like in 98 was like Michael Watson, righty. Casey kind of played the right side, and then I played the lefty. If Darren Lowe was in there, I played righty. But yeah, it's the biggest key, and I talk about it all the time. You watch a young player throw with his right hand after playing a couple of years, and you watch him throw with their left hand, and it's so awkward looking. I think one of the things is that before you start repping out the catching and throwing, is that you simply just like try to stroke it out without a ball and just make it look the same.
Mm.
If you can have the technique look the same without a ball, and then you pick up a ball, and so just making it look the same will help it perform the same. And that just takes a lot of practice. And then I think one of the skills I call it the hardest skill in lacrosse. If I asked you, what do you think the hardest single skill in lacrosse is? I mean, there's so many hard ones, right? Like, I mean, making a goalie save, taking a face off, split dodging, running. But there's one skill. It's going to trick you. I know it.
I could not. You're putting me on the spot here. What's the hardest skill in lacrosse? I don't know. Scoring or passing under pressure. I don't know.
Yeah, I know. It is kind of a trick question, but it's catching with your weak hand.
Okay.
Think about it. How many guys, first of all, catching is the most important skill in lacrosse overall. The most important skill in lacrosse is catching, and catching the right way so you can do it flawlessly and seamlessly to make the next play.
How are you coaching that?
I'll tell you that in a second. And then if you start to think about like catch it, like, have people throw you a ball, right? Catching with your strong hand. And then everyone catches a little weird with their offhand. Catching with your offhand to where it can be perfectly natural, I think, is the hardest skill in the sport. I just teach it I just simplify it and make sure your hands are very vertical. The lacrosse stick is shaped to accept a vertical, to catch the ball vertical. If your hands are like this, a lot of if you ever see like a celebrity, and they like reach their hand out like that, the stick's not built for that. So vertical hands, and then just move your hands to where the ball is, keeping them really quiet. People talk about catching a tennis ball or an egg or whatever. Just quiet. The ball comes and just keep them nice and loud would be, lurching at it. So, but catching with your offhand, next time you got a stick in your hands, rip it off the ball and see how good you can catch with your offhand.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. It's always like a badge of honor with the guys that really have two hands. You're always like, it took discipline. It's almost like learning a language when you're talking about like learning to play two-handed. In those highlights, I'm looking at you playing, and clearly the speed is evident, two hands evident. The other is that like the hezzy stuff that you did, like the hesitations. Give me like a kind of like look into your mind and how you thought about hesitations, because you do that little rocker step, and it's a super great thing to have as a tool as an offensive player to add some level of deception, some level of keeping the guy off balance.
For sure. So I said to myself at one point, I don't know. I mean, I'm 5'8", 175 pounds. This is back, 30 years ago. And I'm like, how am I going to be great and play on Team USA? And I came up with the fact that based on my size, I really had to do everything. So I tried so hard to be able to play lefty righty, shoot inside, shoot outside, shoot on the run, have every possible dodge. So my goal was to be able to do so many different things that would counteract any kind of size issues. And definitely worked out. So for like developing the young attackman, the more things, the more tools you have in your tool shed, the more you could do. The hezi, I just started really evolving that off of like just trying to keep the guy, as you said, off balance. Playing at one speed is a lot easier for the defender to keep up with. So, and I did my primary like two moves were a change of direction and just a downhill, some kind of downhill run split. And if I was using a change of direction, I felt like it was going to be really easy to open up off doing a hesitator, which is kind of is simulating that you're going to stop and change direction. So that's where that came from.
How often were you splitting when you're talking about that change of direction? Obviously you're not going into it like I'm going to split here. It's like I was talking with Chaz Woodson and he was like, you kind of just feel it. If you're a good player, you feel these things. But how often were you doing just kind of change of direction and going one speed or one way as opposed to splitting back to your other hand?
Yeah, so it is true. You have to kind of make a split second decision on like directionally, right? Like if I'm running downhill at somebody, I'm not even sure which way I'm going to go,
Yeah.
kind of leaving my muscle memory to figure that out. As far as like actually doing a downhill split, guys, though, there is some calculation at that because you need to kind of get a run at the guy. And I used that as much as I could. As the ball was coming around in the offense, I would kind of push wide, try to catch wide, and then be able to catch it and then just go totally downhill on my guy as much as I could. The further I got on in my career, guys would take that away. They basically said, we'll just press out and stay a stick length from you, and you won't be able to do that. And then you had to have more tools to go to. And that's when I would go to like a change of direction or whatever.
What's the most underrated tool and overrated tool when it comes to developing an offensive player? Like when you go out there and you're, looking at these high school guys, what's an overrated technique or a talent for these guys to have that gets talked about a lot? Too much.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not really sure because I'm just so into like when I do my teaching, like split, COD, inside roll, rocker, question mark, just get them all. So I'm not exactly sure how I would answer what's the most overrated. I don't know, maybe just like shooting from outside, just because it's like so hard to score from out there, and most of your shots are going to have to be, on the run or getting a little closer to the goal. But that's a great question. You don't get a lot of outside, step down type shots that you're going to have a good chance to put in there at like the high school or Division I level. They're just too easy to save. So that's one maybe I wouldn't practice quite as much.
What's funny about that is that that's a lot of the times what guys you see that are just sitting out there practicing. They're just kind of like tossing with their buddies, throwing it from 15 yards. You're just like, well, again, good luck with that. What's an underrated tool that you see that not a lot of guys use, or I know I'm having a tough time formulating the exact question, but just an underrated talent some of these offensive guys have that you're like, oh, that's a great one to have in the toolbox.
Underrated. I think if you talk to a high level coach, they would say just playing without the ball, off ball play. The young kid generally probably feels that that's not that important, but I tell people all the time, like I was a slashing, dodging attackman. I was a slashing, dodging attackman. And for me, most of my goals were still off ball. It's just too hard to score in today's lacrosse. The defense is the slides, the early slides. So you're going to have to be a really good off-ball player if you want to be dangerous.
I want to stay inside the lines here, talk a little bit more on this coaching aspect. Obviously, the pick game has been one that's, I feel like, developed since you were, playing the game, and we're doing that much more. But I'm just interested in how you look at the game from an offensive level on what you're teaching as far as actions go. How involved is it in the pick game when you're doing this stuff?
I love the pick game, and I wish we were doing it more when I was playing in high school and college. It definitely makes it easier if you're playing against an elite 6'4" monster defender to have to worry about a pick and your dodging skill. Philosophically, the way I have coached it with teams I've coached in the past, though, is to like make it a part of what we do and not all of what we do. And I'm a big believer in like balance. So I like to have like speed motion type offenses. So maybe in the first quarter, we're running like a bunch of speed, exchanges on the backside, hard dodges down alleys or wings. And then we do that a couple possessions. And then next thing you know, we're basically playing box lacrosse out there with two sides. So that's my, you're making the defense really have to work hard to be able to quickly execute out from speed and guys flying around in motion. And then now they're playing picks. So
How,
that's kind of my favorite type of stuff.
yeah, I like the ability to be varied there. That's super important because the defense can often key on a lot of these stuff that you're doing in the first quarter, and it gets just harder as you go on. How are you teaching that off ball stuff? Like maybe from like a team level, but also when you go down to player development and you're talking about hey, you need to get the right spacing or you need to move here, you're not being active enough. How are you kind of going about teaching both the team and the player?
Yeah, so like in my club program, one of the things we do is we do box training in the winter, and that's a great template or tool to be able to show off ball and kind of what you're doing. It's interesting, the young American lacrosse player, when they're like cutting, if they feel that they're open slightly, they stop and they want to like jump up and down and like wait. And in the box game, like you cut in and like if you cut the middle and you don't get it, you're just like, oh well, like I'm not getting it there and I just got to keep cycling. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges is when you're off ball in that type of box offense or playing box, you got to keep moving. You got to move strategically. You got to know when to pop high and accept the ball from the other side of the floor. You got to know when to set a pick for your teammate, use a seal, cut the middle, and you're not open, you get out of there. So it's definitely a kind of a sophisticated thing that you got to teach, but you just wrap it out and explain it well, and the kids usually get it. The biggest kind of detriment to that is like the laziness, right? They're off ball. You're running the offense I run is called 52, and it's the kids just don't understand, the American kids, how hard you got to work off ball. And when you have them working hard, not only are they an easy target to get a pass, but they're occupying the defender. So those guys are important.
Are they when they're moving off ball? So that it's like a constant cycling of cutting and moving in just that spacing. Like, how do you look at it? And excuse my ignorance again. Like I mentioned to another guest who is an offensive player himself and coach that like I've had 10 of these episodes, 12 of these episodes. A majority of them are defensive guys, just because that's my like preference. So yeah. I'm often over my skis, but how are you teaching like the adjacent offensive players and what they should be doing as opposed to the players maybe two passes away and those guys? Or is that even how you look at it?
Yeah, no, it's if you're running like a box style with a two-man game on one side and then an off-ball side, and then your two other guys are kind of mirroring each other around the crease. But I think the biggest key is like to teach them the timing of like, hey, you're the off-ball side right now. And we're going to give those guys 7, 8, 9 seconds of two-man to have a couple of quick two-man exchanges. While that's going on, I want you guys set a down pick, cut the middle, move a couple of times. Then boom, after that, you got to flash high and grab the ball because now you're going to become the on-ball side. So just kind of understand timing and, when to cut the middle. They're reading their defenders. I think box is an amazing developmental tool, because you have to do so much reading of situations. And I always talk about Jeff Teat and why he's so smart. But like when you have the ball in box, like you're reading everything, right? You're like, okay, where is my defender and where can I hang him up on a pick? And then where's my defender's head? Because if he turns and looks away, I might be able to just refuse a pick and go under it. And then what's happening on the other side of the floor? So there's just so much spatial awareness you pick up playing box that's not quite there as a young developing American player. So those Canadians are definitely smart, and that's why.
I love the constraints when I see coaches like shortening it, saying, "Hey, we're going to play within the restraining box" or something like that, because it takes away that space, forces a lot of the skill to even pull off passes in that environment's harder, but also just more things are happening. To your
Yeah,
point,
for sure.
transition game, like I wonder how like the box players look at this, because it's always focused on that kind of the sets in, settled with box, but I've never really had the discussion around how box looks at transition opportunities and things like that. But also just wondering how you think about it in the field game and your thoughts.
Yeah, I think the transition game is definitely a big piece of box. Most teams have a plan where they get a guy immediately to the bench, and then you pick up 12, whatever the bench length is, 10 yards, 12 yards. So you pick up a 12-yard advantage. And so most box teams are trying really hard to push the ball in their first couple of seconds anyway. I think transition is so important because you're never going to score enough goals against most teams just inside the box, whether that's playing box lacrosse or in the field game. Defense, I don't want to say defense is easy, but defense inside the box, right, is easier. So I think most teams are going to need to get a couple of goals here and there, call them easier goals. And so transition is important, but it's also fun for the crowd. You get your crowd, you get those juice goals. The crowd goes nuts. They love them. They're exciting. And your players like to push transition too. So now if I'm on the flip side as a defensive coach, I'm telling my guys like, hey, no easy goals, right? Like just make them earn every goal. Let's get back. Let's settle in. No goals off the face off. But I think from an offensive perspective in box and field, getting a couple transition goals a game, a couple of easy ones, pretty important.
I remember watching the UVA team when LaSala was there, and you talk about juice, like the whole stadium loved that guy. Like if he scored a goal, like it was just nuts. Like UVA instantly had the momentum, even if they were down by like 3 or 4.
No doubt. No doubt.
Yeah.
And they're easy. I consider them anytime you can score a goal in 5 seconds, 7 seconds, that's generally an easier goal that you work a little less hard. It's still hard, right? What he does is very hard, but it's an easy goal. So you need to get a couple of those, and they do rile up the crowd.
What's the principle in the box game? But more so, I'm interested in you as a rider, right? We're sitting on the ride, so I'd love to talk about this part of the game. And so, you know, you don't see a lot of highlights of you riding, but I would love to know how you thought about that. But also, how do they teach the ride in the box game? So, kind of a combo question. Apologies for that.
Yeah, no. So in the box game first, it's more of like it's kind of a zoned up, like, you'll have a couple guys up front for checking, and then you'll have the back end guys like kind of zoned up. And it's hard. The Toronto Rock used to be unbelievable at the forechecking game, and it was hard to clear the ball against them. They won a bunch of championships off that. I had a cool experience in my first U.S. tryout in '94. I guess at UMass we did put a premium on riding, but not as much as I had heard for the U.S. team. And the U.S. coaches were like, "We're gonna ride, and like you might make this team or not make this team." And
Wow.
riding is, and so it just got me thinking and probably refocused my efforts on it. Riding is it's a hard thing because you got to be a dog. Because in reality, right, like if McCabe and Virginia ride, I don't know, I don't know, probably 250 times this year, you're probably going to turn it over 3. So you just got to be patient and be a dog and just keep staying at it, right? It's so easy to say I'm tired or, we're probably not going to turn it over here anyway. But it's a big piece and something you got to do because it helps the team.
I love that. What are you doing here today, Mark? I'd love to kind of touch on your business and how you're kind of interacting with lacrosse today.
Yeah, so ever since I graduated in 1990, actually it was in the class of 93 at UMass, I had a decision to make, and I was going like the business Wall Street route, or I was going the coaching route. And I just decided that like both of them weren't 100% for me. So I decided to kind of marry them up, and I started my camp business. And 30 years later, I'm still running camps. I've kind of evolved the business a little bit to running, tournaments and events as well as camps. So running tournaments, camps, specialty camps. Rabel and I have a specialty camp called Project 9, which is really cool. We bring in some of the best young players from around the country and do some kind of high level, getting them ready for college type stuff.
I love those docs.
In the club game as well. Run 91 Maryland club right now. And so just my life has always been lacrosse, and to this day, still doing it. It's great. I love it.
I love those Project 9 documentaries, man. It really gave a insight and, on the field knowledge of what you guys were doing for these high school guys.
Thanks. Yeah. They were always fun to do. And it's always really rewarding when you're like taking having a mix, right? You're taking a young kid who's never played, teaching him how to catch. And then you're taking, during other times, you're taking kids that are really, really good, and you're trying to make them they're so good when they come to us at Project 9. It's a challenge, but you find these little nuances that can help them and help their sort of learning curve into college. And then when you see them flourish at the college level, it's really cool.
I love that you bring up the 1% player and trying to figure out how you get those guys to maybe even 0.001% in a certain time frame, right? Because that is always a challenge for me. So hearing that you also have this issue sets me at ease. But what are some of those things that you can think of from maybe an offensive player, defense player, whatever, where they're just not, they have most of the game figured out. It is easier, quote unquote, to coach some of these intermediate to beginner level players.
It is.
What are some of those things that you've done for guys now at the college level that unlocks that little bit of potential that they were just missing?
Yeah, so it's obviously different, but a couple of quick examples are for offensive guys, it's hand speed. I'm a big, in order to get the ball moving quick and be able to shoot the ball 90 miles an hour on the run, ultimately the ball leaves your stick at a speed because of your hands. If you move your hands slow, the ball will come out slow. So just little things about hand speed and the ability to pick up a mile per hour and maybe create a little bit more deception. And then also just we work really hard that weekend, and they see me talking about things. And so sometimes it's just a mental little thing. I really wasn't aware that you had to work that hard and stuff like that. So it's kind of nuanced, and it's different for each guy, but you just got to dig them out of the guys. We also, one of the other cool things with Project 9 is we meet individually with each player. So the defensive coaches meet with the D guys, and middies meet, and we just dive in for 10 minutes and talk about the game and what they need to work on. So it's a really cool event, and definitely everybody that comes through says, I had no idea how much instruction and I had no idea I was going to get this much out of it. So it's really cool.
I want to hone in on Paul, who you do these Project 9 events with. Obviously, the PLL has been a really cool thing, in my opinion, for the league and just and for the sport. I'm interested. I mean, you're obviously, talking with Paul at these events and during the year. What do you think of the job that's being done with the PLL, and where do you think that's headed? You obviously are in the Hall of Fame, the National Lacrosse Hall of Fame, and are a great player and played in the MLL. But what are your thoughts here on the professional game today?
I think they're doing a great job. I mean, if you look at Paul, anytime he talks publicly about it, it was just the simple, going to a game. Sorry, my dog's barking, but
no worries.
Going to a game and dressing in a tent in the parking lot, and then the media. But with what they've done with media coverage, just, all the social media stuff, I think it's amazing. Player treatment, player salaries. I think it's awesome, and it's going to give them a really good chance to continue to grow the game and their own brand. So,
in your opinion, what's that next step that the PLL needs to take, other than kind of the constant survival, right? We just need to go from year to year and just see that product grow. But what's the next leg up they can do on the professional side? I know that's a heady question, but
Yeah, I mean, I don't think survival is an issue. I think they've gotten so far now that like I don't think they're. It's like getting too they invested too much for it to like fail. So like any failure would be someone coming in, Netflix or somebody, and being like, "Hey, like you guys are running out of cash. We'll take it over." So I see it. I see it having tremendous staying power. I think one of the things they've really tried to figure out over time is how can they continue to get people who don't love lacrosse like you and I to just be like, I want to watch that game, and maybe even overseas and stuff. I still don't necessarily see that happening. I don't know what their metrics are, but I think once you start getting a non-lacrosse person to be like, that's pretty cool. That game's fun to watch. I think then like now you can start talking like true mainstream. Right now, I still feel like, and again, like I don't know, but I still feel like a huge portion of their viewership are the like you and I and my sons and like the lacrosse
Yeah.
kids watching these games and looking at all their edits. But I think if they keep staying the course with this, I think they as they pick up new people, it'll really take off.
I know we've merged both the field game and the box game in this conversation. I'll just add this in here. Whenever I watch the box game, I feel like they kind of had that figured out, right? From like an entertainer perspective, it's a much cooler experience just
For
to be
sure.
going to those games.
For sure. And I think they have some things that are built in, right? They have time. That league I was playing in, I was drafted in maybe the 10th year in that league in 1993. So it's been going a long time. The venues are pretty sick. So the PLL venues are great, but it's not going to like, the I forget what the building's called in Philly now. When I was playing, it was like the First Union Center, but like they have some really cool things built into to it that have an advantage. But you're right, their infrastructure is pretty cool.
All right, last couple questions, Mark, and then anything you'd like to finish off with, please feel free. But my two overtime questions here. The first one is, what is your favorite drill and why?
So yeah, favorite drill is very simple. We just take four cones and put them about 7 yards away from each other in a square. Okay, and you have four players standing at each cone. You make four passes, and then each time you make a pass, another defender comes in. So you go 4-on-1, four passes, another four passes, you go 4-on-2. And then another four passes, you're now 4-on-3 around this square. And if you could watch me explain it on the field, why it's so important, it reinforces catching. Because if you catch slowly with hand action, the defender's upon you. You have to catch quick and move it. You have to throw accurate passes. Because if you throw inaccurate passes and the guy has to bend down to catch the ball, the defender will be upon him. If he catches it right on the money, you can move it quickly. You can use your eyes, like in a football quarterback looks to the right to throw to the left. So you can use your eyes to look the defenders around. And then you can make little pass fakes to move those three defensemen in the triangle around. So you're working on your catching. You're having a little bit of poise. So by far my favorite drill.
So the defenders are instructed to provide a little bit more than token pressure, like immediately, but they're not like scraping the lane and you're not passing through skip lanes.
No, you are. So,
Oh, you
so
are.
in the beginning, it's 4-on-1. So it's very easy. Like it's easy for the O guys to make the passes. As it becomes 4-on-2, they're now getting their sticks in and they're playing kind of traditional, like off ball transition defense. And then once they get to 3, they're approaching. The only thing they can't really do is like get to the ball and hold on the ball and like check the ball guy. They have to play it as if
Unless
it's
he
a
drops it.
transition rotation around. So
Gotcha.
I say it all the time. Like that's a drill. Kids would get bored with it, but like that's a drill you could probably do at practice for like an hour. I mean, it's good for everybody primarily. And then you use your defenders on the perimeter as well, and they can learn those ball skills as well. So it's a very, very good drill.
I love that, man. I really do. The second overtime question is going to be, there's going to be a minute left in the game. Timeout's called. It's on your offensive possession side so that your boys are coming in. What are you calling from like a action perspective, and then also kind of like what are you saying to them in general?
Yeah. So philosophically, I still to this day, I can't understand why coaches are drawing things during games. And I don't know if it's just a gimmick or not, but everybody has enough practice time. So the way I do my set stuff is like, hey, we're going to practice this set play about 50 times because the timing is going to be important. And if we need to run it in a game, I want to have it super dialed in. And we'll probably have like 4 or 5 plays like that. The biggest thing that I would try to do is to create smoke and mirrors on one side of the field to try to get the ball isolated to my best player on the backside. And you could do that a myriad of ways. Sometimes you just use like I saw Notre Dame do this last year. They would use a really hard dodge and then just quickly throw 2 passes, and then they'd isolate it on the backside, and then they'd slide someone off the crease for an easy dump in. And then a lot of people would use like a heavy 2-man action on one side. So boom, you pass down, pick down, guy flies off the pick, looks like he's going to go, and then you quickly zip it to the backside and you hopefully get a guy isolated in a matchup you like.
Yeah. I love those answers. I appreciate it, Mark. This was a great conversation. Anything we didn't hit on?
I really enjoyed it. It was a blast talking to you, but I don't have too much else right now. It's great.
All right, Mark, appreciate you very much. It's been a great conversation, man. I'd love to have you on again, of course, and good luck on your Tucson seasons.
Love it. Thanks.